John, the artist, Francis, who's written a wonderful text for the exhibition, and myself, Wayne Bolivar, representing sort of Team Turps. So what I thought we could do is have a little chat, but before, I think it'd be quite nice to create some of the context for the exhibition coming together. So I hope it doesn't feel like it's too much like a history lesson, art history lesson, although it's like a sort of slow build-up. But I think it's really important to create that context of the sort of antecedents leading up to this point. So I'm going to take you back in time. It's like a sort of hypnotist or a therapist. I'm going to take you back in time. So it's going to be something like 1989, and you're in India. Okay. You weren't expecting that, were you? You're in India, and you're doing lots of drawings, lots of sketches. You did your BA at Cheltenham, is that correct?
Yep.
You did a BA at Cheltenham, and then you went to India, and you were kind of thinking, how do I become an artist? How do I make work? How do I progress my practice? And you take a sketchbook, which becomes really fundamental to your future, because it's a sketchbook that then Paul Huxley finds particularly interesting at your interview at the Royal College, and you gain a place at the Royal College. Spend a couple of years making a variety of work, including some of the first hanging paintings.
Not at college.
Okay.
Yeah.
But begin work that leads to the...
I did one picture which had a hanging object in it.
Okay.
When I look back, I kind of forget about that, but I remember.
Okay, well, I remember.
Right.
Okay. And to cut the long story short, you have a degree show, as you do at the end of sort of these courses, and there's a note that you find on your space, a note saying call
Charles Sargent.
Yeah, or called CS, in fact.
C. Sargent, I think it was. Somebody handed it me.
Somebody sent it there. And to cut the long story short again, that sort of then sort of meeting or incident that leads to your inclusion in what's probably one of the most sort of seminal exhibitions for our generation, which is the first YBA exhibition, Boundary Road, and works were displayed from works that sort of Saatchi had been putting together loosely under this sort of now sort of shark-infested waters group of artists, some of which were then selected and shown in the first YBA show, including yourself. So starting from that point, just tell us a little bit, how did that feel? How crazy was that? Shark, John Greenwood, Sarah Lucas.
In some ways, it didn't feel as crazy as it should do. I think when I look back on it, it should have felt crazy. I tend to find that the sense of being an artist is such a quiet, not necessarily lonely, but it's something you do on your own. So most of the time, that's what you're doing, and you realise that there's this whole world going on around you that is beginning to take a bit of notice. But actually, what I did didn't change. You'd come out of the studio and you'd go off and have a private view in the Saatchi gallery, and then the next day you'd be back in the studio. It didn't seem as different as I expected it to. My life remained exactly the same, but just you suddenly have these little incidents, or you go off in the Sunday Times like to interview you would photograph you, and then you go back to being what you've always been in a way. So there's a madness to it, but it's also that only exists like 1% of what you're doing. The rest of it's roughly the same.
Yeah.
And it didn't really seem to change very much. The thing I was talking about to someone recently was that at the private view of the first YBA show, everybody went off to a nightclub, and I wasn't invited. And so me and all my friends went round the corner to the pub, and I didn't think anything of it. But I think that had I gone to the nightclub, it would have felt madder. But just going to the pub was just like going to the pub with a bunch of friends.
Do you know what nightclub you went to?
They didn't tell me. I kept trying to find out.
Okay.
And maybe that's not how it happened. That's my kind of memory is created. It's a long time ago. Really. So, but there was a sense that they kind of all knew each other. or that's what it felt like. There was a kind of group, and I think probably because a lot of them did know each other.
Yeah, it's from the sort of
and
Goldsmiths.
Yeah, so it may well have been a kind of Goldsmith Royal College thing. I think it was that they were a much more sociable bunch than I was. You know, so I had a little group of friends, and I just kept carrying them around, or they kept carrying me around. And so I think that that sense of the madness was was less of it. So it felt quite ordinary in a way. I mean, it's the process of being a painter stays the same, and it's one where most of the time you've got your head kind of buried in your own studio, I think, and that just kept going. And I think that partly was my, I now look back on and think that I didn't make the most of that.